She thought it was just an empty garage, a convenient spot to park without asking. But what she didn't realize was that this garage belonged to a Black homeowner, one who had endured the HOO's arrogance for far too long. To her, it was harmless entitlement. To him, it was the final straw in a pattern of disrespect that spoke louder than words. What he did next didn't just shock the neighborhood, it exposed the ugly truth about power, privilege, and race. So what happens when a Curran crosses the line in the wrong driveway? Marcus had worked hard to build a quiet, steady life in his suburban neighborhood. To him, his home wasn't just a house, it was a symbol of years of sacrifice, long shifts, and the hope of finally giving his family a safe, peaceful space. He kept his lawn trimmed, paid his dues to the HOA on time, and minded his own business. For Marcus, the garage wasn't just for storage, it was a sanctuary where he kept tools, memories, and a car he'd spent years restoring. But beneath the neatly painted fences and manicured lawns, the HOO was a battlefield. Marcus had already felt the sting of side comments, strange looks, and the silent judgment that seemed to follow him. Neighbors who barely spoke to him whispered when he passed. Rules that were bent for others seemed to apply more strictly to him. He had learned to brush it off, telling himself it wasn't worth the fight. Then came the moment that would push everything past the point of no return. On an ordinary afternoon, Marcus came home to something that made his heart stop. His garage, his private space, had been taken over. And it wasn't by mistake. It was entitlement, bold and unashamed. A choice made by someone who believed the rules didn't apply to them. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. Instead, he made a decision that would leave the entire neighborhood talking and expose what happens when privilege crosses the wrong line. At first, Marcus thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe a delivery truck had backed up by accident. Maybe a neighbor's guest had misunderstood. But when he walked closer, there it was. A shiny white SUV parked right inside his garage, the door pulled shut as if it belonged there. His name was on the deed. His keys had locked that door. And yet someone else had taken it. It didn't take long to find out who. Everyone in the neighborhood knew her Karen. She was the type of neighbor who left notes about trash cans an inch out of line, who complained if kids laughed too loudly at the park, and who always seemed to have something to say about Marcus. To her, the HOA wasn't a guideline. It was a weapon. And now, without permission, she had decided his garage was hers to use. Marcus confronted her politely, hoping it was all some misunderstanding. But Corinne's response was dripping with entitlement. She waved it off as if it didn't matter, saying she just needed the space temporarily, and implying he should be understanding. It wasn't an apology, it was a dismissal. And that was the moment Marcus realized this wasn't about parking at all. It was about power, about her belief that she could take what she wanted. Because people like him were expected to stay quiet, neighbors noticed too. Some whispered, shaking their heads, but most looked away. Marcus felt the sting of their silence, how easily they ignored his discomfort, how quickly they accepted her excuse. To them, it was just Karen being Karen. To him, it was the same story he had faced all his life. Rules bent for others but tightened against him. His dignity brushed aside as if it didn't matter. This SUV sat there, day after day, like a symbol of her arrogance. Each time Marcus opened the garage, it stared back at him, a reminder that his space, his boundaries, were no longer his own. He could have shouted. He could have called the police. But deep down, he knew how quickly those options could turn against him. A black man raising his voice at a white woman in a suburban neighborhood? The narrative would flip before anyone cared to hear the truth. So Marcus stayed quiet on the outside, but inside, something was building. Every time Karen strutted past his driveway, every time he saw that car sitting where it didn't belong, the weight of injustice pressed harder. This wasn't just about a garage anymore. It was about respect, about dignity, about standing up when silence had cost too much already. And then one morning, Marcus made his move. He locked the garage door, double-checked the bolts, and packed his bags. The SUV was still inside. Corinne had no idea. And Marcus? He wasn't coming back anytime soon. The neighborhood was about to find out what happens when a man who's been underestimated decides enough is enough. By the fifth day, the whispers had grown into open chatter. Neighbors noticed Corinne pacing, furious, demanding answers about her missing SUV. She banged on Marcus's door, called his phone, even rallied the HOA board to investigate. But Marcus was gone on vacation, hundreds of miles away, while her car sat locked inside his garage, like a prisoner of her own entitlement. At first, people laughed quietly, amused at the irony. But then Corinne turned desperate. She accused Marcus of theft, shouted that she had been targeted, and spun the story into something far darker. To anyone willing to listen, she painted herself as the victim, a white woman wronged by a black man. And in a neighborhood where biases ran deep, her words carried weight. The HOA convened an emergency meeting. Some members demanded Marcus be fined, punished, even removed from the community. But others, for the first time, started to question Corinne's story. Why had she parked in his garage in the first place? Why had she assumed she could take what wasn't hers? Slowly, the cracks in her narrative began to show. Karen, however, wasn't ready to let go. She called the police, reporting her car as stolen, and when the officers arrived, they didn't knock on her door. They came straight to Marcus's house, weapons of authority in their uniforms, suspicion heavy in their eyes. The garage door loomed behind them like a secret waiting to be revealed. One wrong move, one wrong word, and Marcus's clever act of resistance could turn into something dangerous, even life-threatening. The air was electric with tension. Would the truth finally come out? Or would Corinne's version of the story drown out his voice, like so many times before? In that moment, the entire neighborhood stood at a crossroads, watching to see whose story would be believed and whose dignity would be erased. When Marcus finally returned, the storm had already passed. The police had inspected the garage, found the SUV exactly where Corinne had left it, and realized the truth. There was no theft, no crime, just a woman's arrogance exposed in the most public way possible. Corinne's story collapsed under its own weight, and for once, the HOO couldn't protect her. The board issued her a fine. Neighbors turned their laughter into open criticism, and her reputation, once built on intimidation, was shattered. For Marcus, the satisfaction wasn't in the fine or in Karen's embarrassment. It was in the silence that followed, the heavy pause where the neighborhood finally saw what he had endured for years. They had witnessed entitlement challenged, prejudice exposed, and a line drawn where none had been before. It was a small victory, yes, but in a world where silence so often favors the powerful, even small victories matter. Yet the story didn't just belong to Marcus. It belongs to every Black man or woman who has ever been told to stay quiet, who has watched rules bend for others but break against them. His locked garage became more than an act of revenge. It became a symbol of resistance, of reclaiming dignity in a place that had tried to strip it away. And here's the haunting truth. If Marcus had raised his voice, if he had shouted instead of outsmarting, the outcome might have been different. We all know why. That's the reality that lingers long after the SUV was returned, long after Curran's pride was bruised. So the question remains not just for this neighborhood, but for all of us. How many times must dignity be tested before respect becomes the rule and not the exception?